Let's begin and daven that the fruit of our learning should help to bring home the final hostage from Gvili and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all the innocents, bring an end to all of our conflicts and protect our Jewish community around the world and be an Ilui Neshama for all of those who have perished as Jews in these last years. I think I'll stop there because otherwise I'll get too upset. Um, we left off last time looking at the end of this sugya, and so we're going to try to understand the end of the sugya here as best we can. And then after that, we'll see how much time we have left, if we have any time left. I wanted to show you Mishnah in Mesefet Al-Halot that has to do with determining when somebody is dead. But in the meantime, what were we discussing here? What was the question that the Gemara was discussing in the last that we looked at the last couple of weeks?
The issue is what's the source for Pekuach Nefesh Docher Shabbat?
Right, very good. So we had a number of answers to this question. That was the question. What's the source from the Torah itself that indicates that Pikuach Nefesh is Docher Shabbat? Right, so let's just see the way the question was phrased was simply this, right? That there had these various Rabbanim were out walking, and this question was posed before them. Minayin lefikuach nefesh shedocha et Shabbat. And minayin we know means from where, meaning what's the source for this halachic notion that pikuach nefesh pushes away Shabbat. So the first answer was from Rabbi Yishmael. So Michael Werner, why don't you remind us what Rabbi Yishmael said? Ana Rabbi Yishmael v'Amar. You have to unmute yourself.
Do you want me to summarize or read?
I'd like you to read.
Oh, okay. Nena Rabbi Ishmael v'amar im machteret yimatzeh haganav ומה זה שספק על ממון בה, ספק על נפשות בה, ושפיכות דמים מטמא את הארץ, וגורם לשכינה שתסתלק מישראל, ניתן להצילו בנפשו, קל וחומר לפיקוח נפש שדוחה את השבת.
Okay, so now explain this. What's his argument? What's the source and what's his argument?
So the source is from Shemot, and the passage in Shemot reads that if one finds a thief tunneling into one's house at night, then one is, and it's not clear whether one is permitted or required to kill him because there is, because the assumption is that you may is that there's doubt about whether he's coming, whether he will kill you or not.
Well, what is so here? I brought up the pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Imba machteret.
Imba machteret yimatzeh haganav behukah v'amet ein lo damim.
So what does the Torah say? about
So
the Baba Machteret.
So if a ganav is found in a tunnel, it's found tunneling into one's house, and one strikes him and kills him, one does not have blood guilt upon oneself.
Okay. So now say what you want to say. Because it's
And
not exactly the way you were phrasing it.
okay, fair enough. So yeah, so if one finds a thief tunneling to one's house and one kills him, then one is not guilty of murder.
Okay.
And
And
then
now,
and then later on, the in Shmot specifies that this only applies at night.
well, not exactly, but okay. I understand. You're saying that because Imzarach alav Shemesh, but that, let's just say Imba Machteret. So the Ganav who's Baba Machteret, if he is killed by the Balabayit into whose house he's tunneling, then the Balabayit is not liable for murder. Okay? So now, what did Rabbi Shmuel say? Mazeh shesafek al mamon ba safek al nifashot ba.
So Rabbi Ishmael says yeah, there's doubt about whether he's simply coming for loot or whether he's coming to kill.
Okay,
And and given
ushfichut damim etamei et haaretz v'gorem l'shchina shetistalek miYisrael.
so shedding of blood pollutes or leaves the land, makes impure the land, and it caused the Shekhinah to flee from Israel.
Okay, nitan hatzilo b'nafsho.
The Baal Habayit, nonetheless, is either allowed or required, it's not clear, to save his life, meaning to kill the Baal Habayit in order to save his own life.
To kill whom?
The Ganav, who's tunneling into the house.
Nitan hatzilo b'nafsho. So who is saving whom?
The Baal Habayit is saving his own life at minimum, and possibly the lives of other people in the house.
Okay, nitan hatzilo. You can.
Okay, so it's in the singular. It's given over to him.
It's given over to save him with his life. Whose life is being saved with whose life?
The Baal Habayit's life is being saved with the Ganaz's life.
All right, let's say. So what do you see from that?
So,
go ahead.
A fortiori, Pekuach Nefesh, Doche Shabbat. It's Shabbat.
So why is it a fortiori?
And that the consequences of shedding blood are oh, huh. Now that actually
What's the kal v'chomer?
okay.
What's kal and what's chamur?
So, I mean, it's actually not entirely clear, is it?
Well, it should be clear. So it's not clear to you. What's not clear to you? That's fine. What's not clear to you?
I guess I would say that I mean the consequence, whether the question is whether I guess the questions are whether I guess sort of on a collective level the homer would be okay, then so the homer would be the consequences of shedding blood, i.e. the land is defiled and the Shekhinah leaves Israel. And sort of the kal would be the consequences of breaking Shabbat, which are grave enough.
Okay, but what's the kal v'chomer? What am I learning out from this case? What's this case teaching me that then indicates to me that all the more so I should break Shabbat to save life?
So if one is either permitted or required to kill the thief, if the Baal Habayit is either permitted or required to kill the thief who is burrowing into his house, even though there is doubt about whether he's coming for mammon or for his life. And even though this carries grave consequence, even though this defiles the shedding of blood, defiles the land and causes Shekhinah to leave Israel, all the more so one is
בדיוק באמצע השיעור.
all the more so one is either required or one is allowed or required to break Shabbat to save a life, even though since the consequences of breaking Shabbat are only felt individually and not communally.
Wow. Okay, I'm not sure about the last part, but
Yes.
I see why you're saying that. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I get the question whether karet is individual, whereas the Shekhinah leaving Israel is communal.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Okay, maybe. Okay, so maybe it's not necessary for me to add that.
Okay, so let's try to put this as simply as possible. I understand from the case of the Machteret that the Baal Habayit who kills the Ganav and is not himself liable for murder. Right? That's what the Torah says. If the Baal Habayit kills the Ganav, who's Baba Machteret, he's not liable for murder. And so I want to derive from that this idea that even though killing the Ganav, killing anybody, right, carries a tremendous weight because it's metamei ha'aretz v'gorei meshchina shetistalek miYisrael. And nonetheless, the Torah mandates that the Baal Habayit can kill the Ganav. Nonetheless, he's mandated to, and he can kill the Ganav. Why? In order to save his life, he's allowed to kill somebody. So then what? Then what will I say? All the more so that I should be able to save someone's life. What's the all the more so? When I don't kill somebody. In other words, if I'm mechalel Shabbat, I haven't caused the Shekhinah lihistalek miYisrael, and I haven't caused the land to be mitamei, right? So I'm learning it out from that as I learn it out as a kal v'chomer. All the more so, if I'm not killing somebody to save somebody's life, certainly the Torah permits me to do that. Certainly the Torah is going to permit me to be mechalel Shabbat, where I'm not killing somebody to save somebody's life. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What did you want to say?
So it sounds like I was reading the Kal V'Chomer differently, whereas I was reading it as the consequences are communal for killing somebody versus individual for breaking
what
Shabbat.
What you're saying is true, but I don't think
that's not part of it. So that's not part of the Kal V'Chomer.
Okay. I don't think so. I think the Kal V'Chomer is the way I laid it out.
I mean, it does sound more plausible.
Okay, so there's all the more so if I'm not going to kill somebody, even though I'm going to violate the Torah, but I'm not going to violate the Torah in such a way that I'm going to kill somebody, which has these heavy consequences. All right, so this is our review of Rabbi Ishmael. So now, excuse me. So now Michael Schwartz, read this, Amar Rava.
Amar Rava, the Kulu eat lahu pircha bar Meidi Shmuel delete le pircha to Rabbi Yishmael Dilma can Rabba Amar Rabba Maitama de Makteret Chazaka, Ena da Mamidis Mot al Mimono, Mahai Meda Yada de Kaila Ape, Amar Im Kaila Ape, Katlina Le, Torah Amra Bal Hargacha, Pashkem Hargo, Eshkachan, Vidai Sefek Minal, Vidai Safek Minalan.
Okay, that's a lot. So let's go through this and see how we understand it. So go back and explain. Amar Rava.
Amar Rava, for all of the explanations, there is a refutation, except for that of Shmuel, that there isn't a refutation. That Rabbi Yishmael perhaps is like Rava that said that Rava said, what is the reason that the Machteret, that the tunnel Chazacha,
Okay,
that
so I'm going to help you break this up, right? Dama Rava, my time de machteret. Rava has asked the question, what's the reason for machteret? What does he mean? What's his question?
so why did Rabbi Yishmael bring this as proof for Pekuach
No,
Nefesh?
so let me explain. When the Gemara when um let's understand how the Gemara is laid out here. Rava comes right after all these Tanaim gave their reasons for what they think the sources. They gave their sources what they think the sources of Pikuach Nefesh being Dochesh Shabbat. That's what everybody does. And the last one to give his opinion is Shmuel, right? Who's an Amara. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmueli, if I had been there with all these other Tanaim, I would have said mine is better than theirs because I darshin l'chai behem below shiyamut behem. So on that, Rava said, l'chulhu itlahu pircha bar midishmuel, telet le pircha. So all, like you said, all of these other people, all these other Tanaim who offered their sources, all of them have a pircha. They all have some kind of refutation. In other words, I can refute all of their sources except for Shmuel. And I have no refutation for Shmuel. And so now that's what Rava said. And now the Gemara is going to explain what the refutations are. It's actually going to go through and tell us why the earlier answers, the answers of the Tanaim, can be refuted, how they can be refuted. So, right, so the first one is Rabbi Shmuel. The Rabbi Shmuel, so let's look at Rabbi Shmuel. That's the one that Michael Werner just reminded us of, right? The Rabbi Shmuel, I can refute it as follows. Dilma Kidir Rava, right? So Rava is the one who introduced this statement here, this current part of the Gemara. Could be that Rava himself stopped. He just said what he said. Everybody could be refuted except for Shmuel. And now the Gemara is coming later after Rava, and they're going to supply the pirchot. They're going to supply the refutations one by one. So the first refutation comes because of another ma'amar of Rava. So Rava, when he was learning the pasuk of Machteret, he asked the following question. This is not because he was learning Rabbi Yishmael. He was learning the inyan of Machteret. And right, so the Torah, as we say, so the Torah says, if a ganav comes in b'machteret, and the Baal Bayit kills him, the Baal Bayit is not liable for murder. So Rava says, "My tama de machteret." What's the reason for machteret? Meaning, what's the reason that in this case of machteret, the Torah doesn't make the Baal Bayit liable for the death of the ganav? So what's the reason? So Rava says, I'll give you the reason. Chazaka ein adam ma'amir atzmo al mamono. This is the first thing. So explain, what does that mean?
So Rava said there's a presumption that a man would not meet himself, would not like give up his life for his money.
Okay. V'hai mida yada dekai la'apeh. Just try to translate the words. V'hai.
Yeah, and this
Mida yada.
knowing knowledge.
Right. This one knows, right? Dekai la'apeh.
The that it's standing in front of him, in front of his face.
Yeah, that he will, right. So to expand it on a little bit, behind this one, he knows Dekai Lape, that he will be confronted, that somebody will stand in to his face. Ve'amar, and he says,
if he stands in front of my face, I will kill him.
mm-hmm.
And the Torah says, "Come to kill you and rise up to kill him, and to meet."
Vashkachan, so we find.
We find the certainty, doubt from where? I'm not sure.
Okay, but your translation is good, but of course it's very literal, so we'll have to fill it out. But that's fine. Okay, so Rav is analyzing the whole this pasuk and this whole inyan of the ganav and the machteret. So he says, what's the reason for the machteret? That is, on what basis is the Torah going to be poter the balabayit from murder, right? If somebody's tunneling into his house, what's the Torah's basis for this? So he supplies what he believes to be the Torah's reasoning. Chazaka ein adam ma'amir atzmo al mamono. That the Torah assumes, right? Has, like you said, there's a presumption, there's a chazaka that a person is not going to stand himself on his property, meaning he's not going to sacrifice his life for his property. V'hai me'diyada dekai la'apeh. And this one, he knows that he will be confronted. V'amar, and he says, Ikai la'apai katel nalei. If he stands before me, I will kill him. If he confronts me, I will kill him. So, and the Torah says, Ba lahorgecha hashkem lahorgo. If somebody comes to kill you, then arise to kill them first. And this Ashkechan, we find Vadai. In other words, this scenario lays out what happens in a case of certainty. But where would I learn a case of safek? Okay, so we still need to fill in a few things here. So let's fill them in. Excuse me. Let's fill them in here with Rashi. So Rava says, "My time with the machter chazaka ein adam mamir atzmo al mamono." Rashi says, "Ein adam mamir atzmo milhatzil et mamono miyad ganav." somebody will not stand himself up to save his property from a thief. Bahai ganav ta'ati b'machteret. And so what's the ganav thinking, right? That's the Bahai mida yada dekai lape. This ganav, what is he thinking? That he's coming and tunneling into the house. Mida yada dekai balabait biape. He knows that the balabait will stand before him or could confront him. Va'adata dahachi ata. And knowing that, he still comes. In other words, the Ganav understands there's a risk that the Balabayit is going to confront him if he is discovered tunneling into, burrowing into the Balabayit's house. So then the Demeimar Amar, so he says, Ki kaila pai katil nale. So the Ganav is saying to himself, so I know I may be confronted, and I know that if I'm confronted, I'm going to kill him. Ve'ein ze safek nefashot, ela vadai nefashot. So the assumption here is that that the Ganav is saying to himself, if I'm confronted by the Balabayit, I'm going to kill him. Now remember the way this is introduced. Rava is saying this is the mindset of the Torah when the Torah says that hababa machteret, that if you kill the baba machteret, ein lo damim, right? That you're not liable. That you as the balabait isn't liable. What you as the balabait are not liable. Why are you not liable? Because the Torah assumes that if you would be confronted by this Ganav, the Ganav already has in mind that he's going to kill you. That's the assumption, right? Ve'ein ze safek nefashot. And so when you kill him, this isn't safek nefashot. It's not a safek. Maybe he'll kill you. Maybe he won't. The Torah assumes that he's definitely going to try to kill you. Right? Certainly, if to stop him is certainly to say is a certainty that you are saving your life. V'hatorah amralo, and the Torah says to him, "Kan acharei sheba l'horgecha hashkem l'horgo," and this is what the Torah means when it says that ein lo damin. It means that if somebody is coming to kill you, you kill them first. So what does that teach us? Ashkachan vadai. So then the Torah, all of this tells me that yes, you are allowed to kill somebody when you are certain that if you don't, they will kill you.
This doesn't sound like allowed, but rather required.
Yes, you could say. Yeah. The Torah says that you need to kill somebody in order to save your life. So that's ashkachan vadai. So the way Rava understands the whole concept of hababa machteret, that why is the balabait patur from murder? It's all based on the idea that he is certainly going to save his life thereby. By killing the Ganav, he is certainly going to save his own life. So that's Ashkachan Vadai. So that we find from this, in other words, we understand from the whole case of Machteret, that when there's a case of Vadai Nefashot, that you will certainly save someone's life, so then the Torah is matira for you to kill somebody. And so what can I extrapolate from that? That anytime it's certain that you can save somebody's life, you can violate the Torah. But what about safek nefashot? What if you're not sure? Right? So safek pikuach nefesh, I won't be able to learn from here because this case is only going to teach me a case where I know for certain that I'm going to save somebody's life. I can violate the Torah. Does that make sense? Let's go back and just read it again into the word. So it's like this, right? So Rav already tells us that all of the Tanaim have a pircha, except for Shmuel. So what's the pircha of Rabbi Yishmael? So now let's understand. The Rabbi Yishmael, Dilma Kidarava. In other words, what did Rabbi Yishmael learn from? He learned from the case of Machteret. And he made a Kal V'chomer. And his Kal V'chomer was, Michael Werner, what was his Kal V'chomer?
That if one is if one is permitted to kill someone in order to save life, kal vachomer, one is permitted to do something that doesn't to save somebody's life in order to do something that doesn't involve killing in order to save someone's life.
Okay. All right. So
it's a lot simpler than what I said before. Yes.
Yeah, but that's fine. Sometimes we have to go through some machinations in order to come up with understand it at a more basic level. But yes, I think it's a good summary. So that's how Rabbi Yishmael understood. I'm going to learn from the case of Machteret. I will be able to learn from that Pikuach Nefesh is Dochesh Shabbat. And then the Gemara says, but maybe I have to learn Machteret the way Rava learned Machteret. So Rava learns Machteret in a slightly, let's say, it's in a more particular way, in a deeper way. And he says, what do I learn from Machteret? I learned that the Torah allows me to save my life by killing somebody, not because I'm not sure that they may or may not kill me. It allows me to save my life by killing them because the Torah is certain that he will kill me if I don't. Right? So Chazaka, right, so Rava, my time at the Machteret, Chazaka ein adam ma'amid atzmo amamono. So it starts off with the idea that a person is not going to sacrifice his own life in order to save his property. Behind mida yada dekai lape. So this Ganav, he knows that he may be confronted by the Balabait, and this Balabait, he's assuming that the Balabait isn't going to sacrifice his own life in order to save his property. And he says, Ikai lapaya katil. So he says, so the Ganav says to himself, so if he confronts me, I'm going to kill him. And knowing that, the Torah Amra, knowing that, the Torah says that, knowing what? Knowing that the Ganav is in fact going to kill you unless you kill him first. The Torah says you have to kill him first. And so then it tells me that the Torah allows me to save my own life by killing somebody when I know that I will certainly thereby save my life. But Pikuach Nefesh, the way I've understood it from our Mishnah, the Torah allows me to be Dochesh Shabbat even when I'm not sure that I'm going to save somebody's life. So I can't learn it out from the case of Machteret. Machteret only tells me that I can be Machal the Torah I can be over on the Torah to save a life when I'm certain that a life will be saved. But it doesn't tell me that I can be over on the Torah when I'm not certain that a life will be saved. So that's the pircha on Rebbe Yishmael. That's the refutation. That's the pushback against learning from the case of Machteret. So the conclusion here is, I can't learn from the case of Machteret that Pikuach Nefesh is Dochesh Shabbat, meaning Safek Pikuach Nefesh is Dochesh Shabbat. I can't learn it from here because this only teaches me a case of Badai. So let's continue on. Who was the next one? The next one was Rabbi Akiva. So what did Rabbi Akiva say? So Michael Werner, we come back to you again. Now Rabbi Akiva v'Amar.
Na Rabbi Akiva Amar, V'chi Yazid Ish al Re'ehu v'Gomer. Me'im Mizbechi Tikachenu Alamud. Me'im Mizbechi V'lo Me'al Mizbechi. V'Amar Rabba Bar.
Okay, actually, so stop there for a second. So let's understand the beginning. So Rabbi Akiva learns from this pasuk and also in Mishpatim. All right, so what does that mean?
So if a man ambushes or traps his neighbor,
Yazid means to scheme, not to
scheme,
ambush,
right? Okay, right. To scheme. Yes, we've done. Yes, if a man schemes to kill his neighbor, his companion, with cunning, then from my mizbeach, you shall take him to put him to death.
Okay, so that's what the Torah says. And Rabbi Akiva darshans me'im mizbechi below me'al mizbechi. So what does that mean?
So from my sanctuary, or from the altar, but not from upon the altar.
Okay, and what did we say that meant?
And that means, so the im mizbechi, that could be, that would be just anyone who's grabbing onto the, basically anybody who's not actually, well, so I'm going to start with the second. Me'al mizbechi would be a Kohen who's actually in the process of doing avodat kahuna upon the altar, and then
okay. So me'im mizbechi would be if so Rashi says im Kohen shu sheba lavod avodah. Right, so he's a Kohen. He's coming to do avodah. We'll just go with the way Rashi understands. Ve'im bizbechi, I remove somebody from let's say next to my mizbeach, but not from on top of my mizbeach. That is, like you said, if he's already begun avodah, I don't remove him. Okay.
So I'm assuming that we could go from the example that Rashi gives to a layperson who is, in the presence of the altar. Just actually, that'd be another call to Homer. So thinking about the example of Yoav.
No, yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying, but that's fine. Hold on to that for a second. Okay. What Rabbi Akiva, what we're going to learn, what are we trying to learn from Rabbi Akiva? What's he trying to teach us?
And that
what's the question that Rabbi Akiva is answering?
From where do we learn that Huach Nefesh doche et Shabbat? Right.
Very good. That's our question. So Rabbi Akiva says, I'm going to learn it from this case of I'll learn it from that. So how am I going to learn it from that? So the first thing is I have to understand that the Torah itself distinguishes between somebody who is about to do avodah on the mizbeach, and if it's a kohen who's about to do avodah on the mizbeach, then I have to remove him. I have to remove him from next to the mizbeach in order to bring him for his capital punishment, right, or for his capital court case. But if it's me'al mizbechi, then not. Then I don't remove him. So what's the case there? V'ama Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, I need a little bit more explanation in the middle. So Rabbi Akiva, of course, is a Tana, and the Gemara here is filling in from this statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Shanu Ela Lahamit. They didn't learn this except to put to death. Aval lahachayot afilu me'al mizbechi. But to get to make somebody be alive, in other words, to keep somebody alive, I would remove him even from on top of the mizbeach, meaning even if it's a kohen in the middle of avodah, in order to keep somebody alive, I will remove him from the mizbeach. So what's that case? What's the case of lahachayot?
A Kohen who could give possibly exculpatory testimony in a capital case.
Very good, right? And so now I say as follows. Now you can read a little more. Mazeh shesafek.
So how does this?
Read it first.
Okay. And what is that? What is this?
Read it first. Uma.
מה זה שספק? יש ממש בדבריו ספק, אין ממש בדבריו בעבודת דוחה שבת. קל וחומר לפיקוח נפש שדוחה את השבת.
Stop. Okay. So now you can try to explain it. Mazeh.
So Moses, given that there is doubt about whether the Cohen's testimony, in fact, will be exculpatory, whether it will, in fact, save the accused's life.
Uh-huh.
In the case of the Koach Nefesh,
you have to add in one more bit, right? Mazeh, right? Mazeh, right? Just as this one, safek yesh mamash bidvarav, safek ein mamash bidvarav. So it's the first part you explain. We're not sure if the Kohen's testimony is in fact going to save somebody's life. Va'avodah docha Shabbat. What does that mean?
So the priestly work pushes away Shabbat.
Okay, and nonetheless, even though avodah is so important, it's dochash Shabbat, but nonetheless,
all the more so.
No. Before we get to the all the more so, nonetheless,
nonetheless, the work is interrupted in order for the Kohen to give potentially exculpatory testimony in a capital case.
Right, that's the nonetheless. And now I can say all the more so.
All the more so, Pikuach Nefesh Doche Shabbat.
Okay. So why is it all the more so that Pikuach Nefesh is Doche Shabbat?
Because Avodat Kahuna is more chamor than Shabbat. or we know that because it itself pushes away Shabbat.
Okay. All right. I think that's good enough for the moment. We'll say a little bit more about it, but for now, so this is Rabbi Akiva's learning. This is how Rabbi Akiva learns. A pikuach nefesh is docha Shabbat. And now I come to our Gemara, and the Gemara says the Rabbi Akiva Nami. So now Michael Schwartz.
The Rabbi Akiva Nami Dilma Kede Abai, the Amar Abai, Masrinan Le Zuga de Rabbanan, Leda Imamash Bidavaro, Ve'eshkachan Vidai Safek Manalon.
Okay, so what does all that mean?
That of Rabbi Akiva also, perhaps he holds like Abai, and Abai said that Masrina, they're delivering him a pair that the rabbis know if it was if his words were mamash, if his words were real or had substance, and so we find that it's Vidai, it's certain, and it leaves the question from where do we know if it's a doubtful case, a case of Safa.
Okay, so how do you understand Masrinan lezuga de Rabbanan? What does that mean?
It's they are.
What's the zug? Who are these people?
A pair of witnesses that the Cohen would be one of a pair of a witness.
Well, I think what it is, Masrin lezuga, they give over to him, let's say to this Kohen, they give over a pair of people who are coming in the name of the rabbis. In other words, they are emissaries of the rabbinical court. So before they actually remove the Kohen from his avodah, they send two emissaries of the court to determine if there's mamash bidvarav or not. In other words,
Okay.
the way we understood it a moment ago, the way we were learning it with Michael Werner, is that we remove the Kohen from the Mizbeach, even though we don't know for sure if his evidence is going to be exculpatory or not. We don't know that. We don't. Safek yesh mamash bidvarav, safek ein mamash bidvarav. We don't know. But now the Gemara says no. But maybe that's not the case, because maybe actually we hold like Abaye and me'im mizbachi tikachenu lamut and velo me'al mizbachi. But me'al mizbachi I would be lokech lamut lachayot. But when will I be me'al mizbachi lachayot? Not when it's a safek,
Right.
but when it's a vadai, meaning that I know that he certainly does have exculpatory evidence, or he has either evidence or testimony that's exculpatory. So, because the Amar Abaye Masrin leZuga de Rabbanan, we give over to him, to this Kohen, a pair of people from the rabbis, in other words, from the rabbinical courts, and they're going to determine Leidai Mamash Bidvarav. They're going to determine whether or not there's substance to his evidence. And so therefore, Ashkachan Badai. So I learn out from the case of Be'imis Bechita Kachan Lamut, Aval Hachayot, Afilu Me'al Mizbachi, right? That's the drasha. It turns out Me'al Mizbachi Lachayot, when I know for certain that the Kohen who's going to testify is going to have exculpatory evidence, that he will have evidence that will certainly be usable in the case. So it doesn't tell me about Safek Pikuach Nefesh. It only tells me that I would override, right? So what do I learn out from these? But me, that to save somebody's life, I can override avodah bebeit hamikdash, which itself overrides Shabbat, right? So by the the transitive formula, so certainly I can override Shabbat to save someone's life. But but now, based on how Abaye understands that case, I only can do that when it's certain that I'm going to save somebody's life. But what if I'm not certain I'm going to save somebody's life? So that's Safek Minalan. Again, I have this question. I'm left with the question: where do I know Safek Pikuach Nefesh is Dochesh Shabbat? So let's read a little bit further. Um, maybe hold on a second. Okay, Michael Werner, why don't you read V'chuhu?
Just one question. Now, my understanding is that the standard for exculpatory evidence in capital cases was much lower, was actually fairly low. Meaning all that one had to do was sort of like was basically differ slightly from somebody who had given testimony that implicates the accused. So it'd be like a very low bar for exculpatory evidence. Is that correct? Or
So without oversimplifying,
I am
no, but you're right to say that. That is, I don't want to say it's exactly a low bar, but there is a
low bar is the
low.
wrong term. Yes.
Well, it's not completely. It's not really completely out of place. I understand what you're saying. Let's say that's true. So what?
Well, meaning that it would not be meaning that there'd be less room for doubt about whether the testimony could be exculpatory or not. Meaning that if somebody's giving exculpatory evidence, one would
Yeah.
not be subject to cross examination by the prosecution as they would be, say, in sort of like in an adversarial more adversarial court.
Okay, actually, that's not necessarily true.
Okay.
That's not necessarily true. I see what you're saying. The long and short of that is, or maybe I should just say the short of it is, there are a lot of things um, that can hold up the trial, right? That a capital trial can be held up with very meager kinds of evidences or testimonies. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will sway the trial ultimately, but it means that there's an obligation for the Beit Din to hear any possible exculpatory evidence. You know what? Hold on to that because it may come out to be relevant, let's say more relevant in a moment. So let's see. So wait, so who did I ask to read?
You asked me to read.
Go ahead. B'chul ashkachan.
Behu ashkachan v'dai safek amena lam v'dishmuel v'dai late le pircha.
Stop. So let's explain those words. B'chulhu.
And all of this.
Okay, or all of them.
All of them.
Ashkechan, which, right? Ashkechan badai, safek benana. Kulu ashkechan badai.
They forgot certainty that
Michael Schwartz, Ashkechon.
We find that there are cases of certainty.
Right, we find. Ashkechan, right? Kulhu Ashkechan Vadai. In all of them, we find Vadai. That is, like, I would say, like the way you said it now, that all of these are cases of certainty. Safek Minalan. Michael Werner.
these are not cases of
What
doubt.
does Minalan mean?
Um, I thought I could escape so easily. I don't recall. I know that we've done. I know that
Michael
you've.
Schwartz.
From where? From where? What's the source?
Right, Mina, from where Lan is it to us? From where is the source for us? So, in other words, we went through explicitly talking about first Rabbi Yishmael and then Rabbi Akiva, and saying that each of them, each of their proofs for how I know that the Torah is matzira pikuach nefesh, right, to be docha Shabbat, I push away each of their proofs because each of them is a case of vadai, where the Torah is being matir. Excuse me, I would learn out from there that the Torah would be matir to save somebody's life if I knew for certain that a life was going to be saved. Right? That's Ashkechan Badai. We find in them Badai, right? We find in them an absolute case. But Safek Minalan, but they don't, where would I learn? Right? We had this Minalan, just pay attention, right? We had it 3 times. Here, this is a single word, Minalan. It's the same as the 2 words, Minalan. Right? Kulhu. So all of them. So we're not going to go through each one. We had other ones after Rabbi Akiva, right? We had several more. We had Rabbi Elazar who learned it from Mila. We had Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda who learned it from Et Shabtotai Tishmoru, and so forth. So the Gemara just says, rather than go through each one of them, it says, in all of those cases, they're all going to teach me, they would all be grounds for saying that the Torah is would permit being dochesh Shabbat for pikuach nefesh in a case where you knew that you would certainly save somebody's life. But what about a case where you're not certain you're going to save somebody's life? And then the Gemara says, "Uvid Shmuel v'dai late pircha." So Shmuel, but what Shmuel said, certainly we don't have a refutation for that. So what did Shmuel say? He said, "B'chai behem, v'lo sheyamut behem." So why is that such a great response to this question?
It would cover cases of doubt as well, certainly.
Right. So presumably now we understand that this is what the Gemara is concerned about, that Shmuel's proof text apparently is going to cover cases where you might die, right? V'chai behem v'lo sheyamut behem is going to tell me that I'm going to be dochesh Shabbat in order so that I can live, because otherwise I might die. The Shmuel v'dai late pircha. Amar Ravina v'item Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. And so the Gemara ends off with this Ma'amar of Ravina, famous Ma'amar of Ravina. And if you'll say, it was said by Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Tava chada pilpalta charifa, mimlat sana dekare. It rolls trippingly off the tongue, as you might know. Right? So what is it? Tava is tov, chada is one, Pilpalta is a pilpel, right? Tov pilpel achad charifa, tov pilpel charif echad, mimla tzana dekare, mimlo sal of delat, right? One spicy pepper is better than a basket full of gourds or a basket full of squash. So I see Michael Schwartz is laughing, and so tell us what does this mean?
It sounds like something out of Monty Python. I don't know.
I can actually say pictures of John Cleese like that man's out of his gourd.
Other than I guess a spicy pepper is tastier than a gourd. I don't know.
It has more flavor than it cuts through more than a basket full of gourds. Yes.
Right. So it's a basket full of gourds. It's very bland. But one little spice that'll spice up the whole meal. And you'll uh this metaphor, it appears also in later literature, in later halachic literature. Um and the idea, of course, also of pilpul. Pilpul, which is a term you may be familiar with, which means this kind of sharp exchange. What does it mean, sharp? It means like
Sharp.
very, very well thought out or very sharp arguments, right? So I get it from here. Tabachada pilpalta charifa mimlot zanidakari.
So a hot pepper cuts through the Gordian knot. Yes.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but
Yes.
I think that's mixing too many metaphors.
Yes. Yes.
Amar Bayis, hold on a second. So here, let me read this Rashi here, and this might help to fill out a little bit more. And also in terms of addressing like that what Michael Werner brought out earlier. So Abaye was Gemara brought earlier, right, just a moment ago regarding Rabbi Akiva. So why don't I learn from Rabbi Akiva Dilma Kida Abaye? Because maybe the case of Me'im Mizbechi, I learned that from Abaye, or I learned it the way Abaye learns it, and he said Abaye that what Abaye said, Masrim le'zugad Rabbanan, le'dayin b'mash b'dvarav. So Rashi here explains this at greater length. Yamar Abaye b'Sanhedrin al hayotzei lisakel, someone who is going out. In other words, he's now being brought uh, he's being brought out for execution. Right? He's going out to be stoned. The Amar, and somebody says, Yesh li zchut lamed al atzmi, and the person himself says, I can learn in my own favor. Diktani hatam, like we learned there in the Mishnah, machzirin oto afilu arba b'chamesh pamim. We return him. In other words, even though the din was already decided, even though he's now being taken out on his way to be executed, but if he says, I actually have evidence that can save my life, we return him even 4 or 5 times. But what? Uvilvad shehei mamash bidvarav. As long as there's something actual in his words, something substantive in his words. And so the Gemara, they ask on that, how will they know? How would they know if yesh mamash bidvarav or not? Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, Masrin le'zugad Rabbanan, they give over to him a pair from the rabbis, Shemlavino to ad beit skila. They accompany him to the place of stoning. or they're accompanying him out to where he's going to be executed. The imamar, and if he says, Yeshli l'lamed zchut al atzmi, and if he says, I have something that can find favor for myself, Yishma'u Elu, these two will hear him. Im yesh mamash bidvarav im lav, they'll be able to hear him to know whether there's something actual or something substantive in his words or not. V'hachanami gabe kohen oved ikalumeimar nami dahachi avdilei. In other words, Rashi's just he's filling this out. That when Abaye says Masrin lezuga d'Rabbanan leidan mamash bidvarav, that was talking about this case of a person who's already been judged for capital punishment. And Abaye says, but nonetheless, we give, when he's being accompanied out to be executed, we give him two representatives from the Beis Din in case he himself is going to say, we have to go back and reopen my case because I have exculpatory evidence about myself. They will be right there to determine whether or not what he has to say is going to fly in court, whether it's going to be something worth bringing back and reopening the case for. And so, Dilma Kedabaye, the Rabbi Akiva Nami, Dilma Kedabaye, maybe it's like Abaye, meaning also in the case of Rabbi Akiva about Me'im Mizbachi to Kachenim Lamut, but Lahachayot, right? And Afilu Me'al Mizbachi, maybe Abaye would also apply there, that even in the case of the Kohen who's in the middle of doing Avodah on the Mizbeach, I would only take him Lahachayot in order to give evidence to keep somebody alive if it would be the way Abaye describes, that there would be a zug from the Rabbanan who would be there to understand whether or not his evidence is going to be helpful or not. The Ashkechan Badai Safek Benan, Rashi says, Mehacha de Avadai Pikuach Nefesh Mechalalin. About Safek Lo Shma'ina Mina. Right? So from here, I learned that for Vadai Pikuach Nefesh, if I know for certain I'm going to save somebody's life, I am a Chal Shabbos. But if it's a doubt whether I will or not, Lo Shma'ina Mina, I don't learn out from here. In other words, these proofs that I have from these Tanaim will not be proofs about Safek. The Kulhu Nami Kigon Ach Chalak, Ika Lamemar Devadai Pikuach Nefesh Kamema'ed V'lo Safek, V'chein V'lo Etem Besurim B'yada Lamut, Vadai, V'chein Chilei Alav Kadesh Yishmor Vadai Shabtot Arbei. In other words, Rashi here is saying, if you go back and you look at all the subsequent proofs that the other Tanaim brought, we can go through them one by one. Even right, as we did Rabbi Akiva and we did Rabbi Shmuel, and now the Gemara says it's true of all of them. Rashi's he's just reminding us of what the other proofs were, to say that each of them is also ultimately only going to be a proof that I can be Machal Shabbos in order to be able to certainly save somebody's life. Only Vadai, but not Bisafek. And why by Shmuel there is no refutation? Why? Asher yaseh Adam hamitzvot shichya behem vadai v'lo shiavo ba'asiyatan lidei safek mita. This is how Rashi understands Shmuel in light of this question of vadai and safek. That Shmuel says Asher yaseh Adam means a person does these mitzvot in order to live by them for certain. In other words, he will come to live certainly, and not that he will come by doing them to any doubt, any safek that might lead to his death. And so I learn out from Shmuel that I'm Mechalel Shabbat even on the safek. And Rashi says, Chada pilpata, one pepper. Rashi says the pilpata means one seed, right? Even one pepper seed. Anyway, so I think we'll finish off here. I'll just say what's interesting about this sugya. One of the things I think that's outstanding about this sugya is, in a sense, what underlies the question of where do I know pikuach nefesh is dochesh Shabbat. It's I think it goes back to something which maybe Michael Werner said. I'm not going to be able to quote you from a couple of weeks ago, but and it doesn't matter so much, but I think you'll see what I'm saying. That, see, we ourselves already have it ingrained in our own consciousness that Safek Pikuach Nefesh is Dochesh Shabbat. And so we already have, that's, in a sense, that's our starting place, because that's how we've learned, right? Probably as you're learning, you as you start to learn about Judaism, you start to learn about halacha. This is maybe one of the earliest things that you may have learned about Judaism. And here, where the Gemara wants to know, but what? How do we know it? That is, what is the textual source? All of a sudden, we don't know, and you see, all these Tanaim give different answers, and I think one could argue that this is a halakha, it's a halachic concept that everybody knows, even though maybe the tradition for a source didn't come down to them. In other words, I'm not sure that Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva were reiterating a Masorah that they had, or that the Masorah was simply that Pikuach Nefesh, Afilu Safek Pikuach Nefesh is Dochesh Shabbat. That was the Masorah, and now they're trying to supply a source. So, and that's why it gives room for even Shmuel, somebody who comes later, who's not a Tana, who's an Amora, for him to give a source, because, see, ultimately, even if we don't come up with, as it were, a satisfactory source, we're not going to change the halachic concept. The halachic concept stands apparently because this is in itself is a tradition that no one disagrees with. Now, the Gemara could have said that it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and that would have taken away all discussion, right? Because halacha l'Moshe Sinai, by definition, means that it's a halacha that Moses received at Sinai that doesn't have a textual source. That's what halacha l'Moshe Sinai means. It doesn't have a textual source. So it's an interesting thing that they all go out of their way to try to figure out a textual source using these midot hadrash. I don't have a real conclusion about this. I'm just pointing out that this is it's an interesting phenomenon. This whole sugya is it's a very interesting phenomenon that everybody understands that pikuach nefesh is dochesh Shabbat and safek pikuach nefesh is dochesh Shabbat. Everybody knows that. Nobody challenges this, our Mishnah, which goes through all these sfekot, that even if it's safek achar safek, I'm still dochesh Shabbat, until the point that I know that I shouldn't be, right? That the person is dead or that it's not relevant anymore. So everybody knows that. But nonetheless, there's the exercise of trying to figure out what the source is. Michael Werner, did you want to say something?
I mean, only that this perhaps brings together sort of two sides of Yoma itself, of Yom Kippurim itself. On one hand, we have the idea of the day itself, mechaper aleinu.
Okay.
It's that idea of sort of a merciful God. On the other hand, we also have the sense of deadly peril. The immediately prescribed laws and sort of the deadly peril. And so, in some sense, this brings those two sides together to suggest that, in some sense, the laws themselves are an aspect of that just and merciful God, and vice versa.
I like the idea that you're laying out, but I'm not sure how I understand it based on this sugya from this idea of pikuach nefesh.
So I mean, independently of sort of the halacha, we have. I mean, at least maybe I can only speak for myself. Like there's a sense we can't imagine a just and merciful God who would not rule that pikuach nefesh dochet Shabbat.
Okay, I see. Okay, go ahead.
And that imagination could lend itself to kind of very antinomian understanding of God's mercy. That some sense God's mercy is in some sense sort of in opposition to the law. But what this is doing is bringing the two together, saying that sort of the law and the Masorah.
Wait, I want to stop you. Why would you think that's an antinomian concept?
Well, one could read it that way because we hold that independently of halacha. I mean, it's something that we all sort of it's an intuitive understanding. Like we intuitively sort of imagine, we intuit that there can't be a just and merciful God who would not consider that nefesh dochet Shabbat, and that's independent of what.
It's interesting what you're saying. I might push back on that and say, no, that's exactly part and parcel of the whole halachic system.
Right,
that doesn't stand outside of.
I'm not saying that one could argue that way. I'm not saying that one does argue that, but in some sense, that what this discussion of the source for the pikuach nefesh does is that it suggests exactly what you're saying. That's part and parcel of the system.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to think about that. It's an interesting thought. So thank you for that. Tov, I think this is a good place to stop. Next time, before we go on in the sugya, as you can see, we could dig a little bit further into the arguments here, but I think it's okay if we don't. Before we go on to the next Mishnah, I want to go back and look at some of the halachot that are relevant toward, as I mentioned, to pikuach nefesh and end of life issues. Of course, this is a huge topic. We're not going to cover even a fraction of it, but it might be interesting for us to look at one or two things along the way. So I'll just point out to you, you're all welcome to look at this yourself. There's a Mishnah in Ohalot in the first chapter. If you've never learned Ohalot, it's not the easiest Masechet to learn, but you may want to just skip ahead in the first chapter in the Mishnah Vav. And I'll just read this to you. We'll discuss it a little bit next time. This is one of the sources for which halacha has to deal with the question of the point of death. At what point is somebody dead? So in our Mishnah in Shabbat, we need to know if somebody's dead because at that point we'll stop being Mechalel Shabbat for them. If they're dead, they're dead, so there's no point in being Mechalel Shabbat. So that's one nafkamina, right? That's one practical outcome for knowing. But here we have another instance. It goes like this. Adam eino mitameh ad shetetzei nafsho, right? So ohalot, broadly speaking, it deals with the din of tumat oholim, right? If somebody dies under a roof inside of a tent, but mainly that there's a roof over their body, that tuma permeates the whole area that's under the roof, even if things don't come in direct contact with the body. Right? That's the idea of tumat ohel. So Adam eino mitameh ad shetetzei nafsho, but a person doesn't impart tuma until his soul departs. In other words, until he's dead. Afilu miguyad, afilu goses, even if he's been cut up, and even if he's goses, right? Even if he's on the verge of death. And in other words, even if he's in a situation where we would say he's terminal, his death is imminent. It's even though it's imminent, he's not mitameh until tetzei nafsho. And then it gives some for halachic purposes, what difference does it make? So, for example, zokek li yibum ufoter minha yibum ma'achil batruma ufosil batruma v'chein behema v'chaya einam mitamim. Similarly, both a domesticated animal or a wild animal, they're also not mitameh ad shetetzei nafsham until they die. Chutzu roshehem, if their heads are cut off, afal pishim kasim, even though they convulse, tameim, they are tamei. Kigon zanav shelata'a shehi mefarkasim, like the tail of a lizard that convulses. In other words, the end of the Mishnah, Hutzuro Shehem, the head of an animal or the head of a human being, if the head is cut off, you might think that the person is not yet dead because their body could still be convulsing even after the head is cut off. So the Mishnah says, Utzura Shehem, even though they're convulsing, they're tameh. In other words, they impart tuma. Both men and behema and chaya, they all impart tuma. And what's it like? It's like the tail of a reptile that was cut off, that the tail itself can still be convulsing even though it's been completely separated from the body of the reptile. So this is another source that's brought to bear when talking about determining death. Well, I think we'll talk about it a little bit next time, but you're welcome to look at it yourself. And if you scroll down a little bit further, I mentioned this, I think, last time, the 248 Evarim of a person that they're listed here in this Mishnah at the end of the first parak of Ahalot. The 248 limbs in a person, and then it goes through and it lists them. So if you want to know what they are, they're all listed here. And with that, I think we'll stop unless there's any last questions or comments. No. Okay.
So here's wishing you a beautiful Harif, which I think is just a thing to clear one's head.
I had something spicy before. It does help, but I appreciate that. So, Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll see you next week.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Good night.
And,
Good night.
Good night,
bye-bye.
good day, whichever it is.